Well, as you've been hearing, more than 1 million people joined a day of protests and strikes across France on Thursday, demonstrating against plans to push back the retirement age from 62 to 64. Our press reviewer Leo McGuinn is in studio with me again. Leo, how has French media been reacting to these strikes?
As you say, Sharon, over 1 million people took to the streets of French towns and cities across the country in what was called Black Thursday, of course, protesting against these reforms to push the retirement age from 62 up to 64. As you'd imagine, it's all over the French press this morning. This is Le Figaro, which is generally considered a more right-leaning paper. You can see this quite impressive images. You can see this is Paris, over 100,000 people in Paris. You can see the people en masse out in the streets. You can see the headline here, Macron garde le cap, essentially saying the government aren't going to be deterred by this. They aren't going to be swayed by the people. They are going to go ahead with the reforms. Libération, a more left-leaning publication, En Force, really kind of underlining the togetherness of the people protesting these reforms. They talk about this being a victory for the unions and one that's weakened the government, which is something that's touched on in this opinion piece in Le Monde by Audrey Tonnelier, journalist Audrey Tonnelier. She talks about the disconnect between the people and the government. There was a relief at how the reforms were received in the parliament. The government were relieved that they were able to push them through, completely different to what the people of France think. And they showed that yesterday by going out on force. Last one from Le Figaro, a very different view. This is by conservative journalist Yves Treillard. He argues that, yeah, there were 1 million people on the streets yesterday, but that's just a drop in the ocean, as he calls it, of the 30 million people that were actually working yesterday. He denounces those who protested. He said, they're the same ones as usual. They're always the ones out on the streets. It's always the same faces. According to him, the executive, they have nothing to worry about, and these reforms should go ahead as planned.
Moving to the other side of the world then, Leo, the Prime Minister of New Zealand has announced plans to step down. Tell us, what has the reaction been in New Zealand?
Yeah, this news did come as a big shock yesterday when Jacinda Ardern announced that she was going to resign as Prime Minister after nearly 6 years in charge. She wasn't expected to resign, but the news hasn't gone down badly, I would say. Her popularity has plummeted in the last 2 years. And I've got a few pieces here. This is the New Zealand Herald, which is the biggest newspaper in the country, Auckland-based. They are defending Ardern. They say, I'm surprised she didn't quit earlier, but they're talking about the vitriol, the hate she received, and they're surprised that she lasted this long. Also, in the Herald, they talk about how this will put Labour back in the election race. At the moment, they're behind the National Party in the polls, but this is the move that could get them back level and potentially stay in power come those elections in October. I want to show you this from Stuff. So Stuff is the biggest news site in New Zealand, about 2 million their viewership per month. They explain her prime ministership in 6 helpful charts. I want to show you one in particular. So this shows her popularity and her rating throughout her prime ministership. This is May 2020, where she peaked as the pandemic began. She was praised for her stance on lockdowns. And this is recently, the most recent polling, November 2022, down at 29% from 60% just 2 years previously. That's down to what Stuff call lockdown fatigue.
Staying down under then and moving to Australia in a spot of tennis. Leo, there were some incredible scenes in Melbourne last night involving Andy Murray at the Australian Open.
The Australian Open is well underway now. It's deep into the first week, and one of the more incredible matches you'll ever see. Andy Murray beat Thanasi Kokkinakis in a 5-set thriller. Came back from 2 sets down. You can see he's on the front pages of all the UK papers, The Telegraph, The Times, The Mail as well. I should mention, it lasted 5 hours and 45 minutes, the match, but it's been controversial. It's come under criticism because the match didn't end until 4 a.m. Spectators, ball boys, ball girls, umpires, they all had to stay. And this has been blasted. This is Australian news outlet ABC. They say it's nonsense, and they've criticised the scheduling. The Australian Open have hit back. This is the boss, Craig Tiley, of the Australian Open. He said there's no plans to change it. One thing is for sure, Andy Murray's into the 3rd round. He's been written off. He's 35, he's got a metal hip, he's never won the Australian Open, losing in the final 5 times. But with Andy Murray, you just never know. He could win it.
And it always seems to hit the headlines, the Australian Open. Leo, thank you so much for that press review.